Hi, and welcome to Teach to Resist. I'm Dr. Lyndze Harvey, and today I want to talk to you about the wonderful tool of self regulation and what gets in our way of enacting this tool with ourselves and others. Specifically, this workshop is designed for parents, for early learning educators, and for teachers. And I'm really going to be focusing more on what self regulation means for us as caretakers and for the little ones with whom we work. So, what I want to look at is first, I want to explore the misperceptions and the meaning of what it is to self regulate. Um, Self regulation is often used outside of the context that I'm using it. When I use self regulation, I'm talking about stress and the way in which stress uses up our energy and makes it difficult for us to do a lot of things. And so I'm going to be taking us through how to reduce stress, how to identify stress, and how to become more resilient to stress, and how this can help us to connect, to learn, and to be the best people that we can be. I'm also going to take you through an examination of your own self-regulation to help you have a better understanding of your own stressors and your own resiliency. A lot of the time, we try to fill from an empty cup. And when it comes to us as caretakers, we need to make sure that we are self regulated so that we can help others to feel the calm that we feel, even lend our calm to them. So, how do we identify our stressors and become more resilient? And then that can also translate into being able to identify the stressors of the children with whom we work and the children that we love. And finally, I want to help us to see and hear the stories and these stories that surround self regulation. And when I say stories, I don't mean storytelling, I mean the ways in which the status quo is told through us. And oftentimes, this creates barriers that keep us from self regulating or from co regulating with children. In fact, we might even see or hear children in a way that is counterproductive to helping them to self regulate. So, the first thing I want to do is get you to evoke a very specific memory. And while we're doing this, you may want to pause the video and write or draw or just take some time to think and reflect on a specific time in your life. So, the time that I want you to think back to is the last time that you just lost it with your kids or the kids with whom you work, or maybe with their partner or a parent. The last time you, what I call, flipped your lid, where you felt really strong feelings and you almost feel like you lose control over yourself. So think back to the last time that you yelled or found yourself struggling really hard to keep your cool. So I want you to close your eyes, or if you've immediately thought of that, start writing or drawing. And I want you to go back to that moment and reflect on how your body felt. Where were these emotions located in your body? Perhaps you felt your face get warm. Perhaps you felt a weight on your chest. Maybe you felt these emotions all over and you began to shake. I want you to consider whether or not that feeling was slow to build or if it was like flipping a switch. How did you feel when that situation had come to its close and you were walking away or driving away or continuing with your day? What sorts of things did you say to yourself about yourself when you think about that situation? Or perhaps even when you were in that situation, what kinds of things were you saying to yourself about yourself? What kinds of things were you saying about the other people or person involved? to yourself. So just take a moment to jot that down. Or if you're doing this workshop with someone else, maybe even share that moment with someone else. And I'm going to share with you a moment that I encounter and that I like to bring up to show that I'm just as human as everyone else. And this moment is a great touchstone for me to return to consider how my stress affected me and what sort of resiliency strategies I need to practice. So this is the room of my children. I have two children. They're 10 and 8 years old. They share a bedroom. They're very creative, playful kids. They love to build forts, and they are not big fans of putting away their laundry. I think you might even be able to see a pair of underwear trapped around a pair of pants on the floor there. And so my work is very important to me. I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm doing, and it's a huge part of my identity. And I was very stressed one particular morning because I had some deadlines and I was feeling a bit of writer's block, and I was going to take my kids swimming, and I had asked them before we went swimming, to clean their room. So I'd written down what I'd like them to do for the morning while I was working, and clean the room was one of those things, top of the list, in fact. And part of this is because I feel a lot calmer when things are tidy. I'm a bit of a neat freak, and I don't expect everyone to live like this, but occasionally to have this room that my children inhabit a bit more put together is very calming to me. So I made this request. They did not fulfill this request. And as we were getting ready for swimming, I realized that one of them forgot their bathing suit upstairs. So I told them to get in the car, and I ran upstairs, and all the lights were on in their rooms. I'm kind of mumbling about wasted energy and turning off lights and grabbing the bathing suit. And I am not used to the coffee table being in that position, so I run into the coffee table with my shin. And I just feel it like a light switch flipping. My lid flips. I completely lose it. I can feel my face get flushed. I can feel it felt like my tongue was swelling. I start kind of swearing under my breath. I'm stuttering. I try to go down the stairs to join my children in the car, and I'm almost tripping down the stairs like my legs aren't going to work. My balance is off. And I make my way out to the car. I toss the bathing suit in the back seat, and my kids request for music to be on, which is a normal request. We often listen to music in the car, but my response is fury. My response is to shout, "No, we're not having any music." And, I'm thinking in my head, "Oh, you're a terrible mother. You've lost control. Get it together. Kids are kids." But then at the same time, I started saying to myself, well, they don't respect my needs, and I made this request, and they're so lazy, and they get so distracted, and why do I have to help them clean their room all the time? I'm not their maid. And I've got this litany of frustrated words flowing through my mind, and I feel regret when I drop them off for swimming. I feel guilt. I maybe even feel some shame. And I'm sure that they didn't feel so great either. How do we avoid these moments? How do we transform these moments is a big question. And there are a lot of things getting in our way. And one thing that's getting in our way is the story of self-control, or the self-control model of viewing ourselves and others, particularly children. And this model tells us that we need to be controlling or containing our own impulses, and we expect others to do the same, even children, or we need to be teaching those children to control or contain their impulses, that's our job in some way. We often tie self-control to character. For example, I saw myself as a poor parent. I saw myself as not having control, and that being a reflection on how well I could do my job as a parent. I also saw my children as having a lack of self-control and being lazy or disrespectful. So I tie those actions to their character. And all of this is based on surface behaviors. The surface behavior of the room being untidy, my surface behavior of shouting. These are surface behaviors, and not to say that it's appropriate to shout or excusable to shout, or excusable that they didn't clean their room. But the self-control model has us focused on these certain aspects and not on others. Sets up barriers to us even seeing that there might be other elements at play. So the self-regulation model takes us in a different direction. It reframes a few things, starting with stress, bringing stress into the picture and seeing it as disabling our abilities to control our impulses. And this is really key. You know, we often think, well, if we only had self-control, then we'd be able to do the things that we need to do. Stress disables our ability to have self-control. So we need to have self-regulation first. We need to be able to manage our stressors before we can have self-control. Self-control is still a wonderful thing to have, but we can't have that. We can't exhibit positive ways of self-control without regulating our stress and having resiliency to stress. Self-regulation also helps us to see behavior through a different lens. We see stress behavior rather than misbehavior. Not to say that there is not misbehavior, but the focus is on stress behavior first. Is there stress in the situation? Is the behavior that I'm seeing the result of that stress? Is this stress communication? Rather than immediately assuming that it's misbehavior. And then finally, there is this effort in self-regulation to think about unmet needs, skill deficits, and disconnection. Am I without control, or am I not having enough of my needs met so that I cannot regulate myself well enough so that I can have that self-control? Am I lacking a skill so that I can have resiliency and take my deep breath and find my way back to calm so that I can have the self-control that I need in a difficult situation? And in all, there is this layer of disconnection. And with self-regulation, we can see that we are disconnected from another, or disconnected from ourselves, or disconnected by an idea even. And how do we find our way back to connection is a big question in self-regulation. So I'm sure at some point while I'm speaking, you have a little bit of a discomfort. Maybe you're feeling a little bit vulnerable. And this is really natural, and I encourage you to feel those feelings and to lean into them. And this is where that idea that there are stories that we all know that are playing a really big role here. The stories that we all know give us certainty. They give us comfort. And they're not usually told by us so much as they're told through us. A good example of a story we all know is that the color that represents a baby boy is blue. The color for baby girls is pink. So you may see that that is a societal influence, that you don't even really agree that colors have gender. And yet we know how to fill in those blanks because that story has been told to us since we were very young, and it's told all around us still. And so we have to resist that story. When it comes to self-regulation, the story that we all know is this self-control story, and we have to resist that story. And this can become really challenging and discomforting. So I want to show you this Twitter account called Why My Kid Is Crying. Jackie says, I asked her to walk to the top of the driveway instead of carrying her. That is why she's crying. The middle picture suggests that she asked me to cut her sandwich into triangles and I cut it into triangles. Reason my kid is crying. And the final picture, I put the straw in the Capri Sun or the juice box. And this is why she's crying. I have to admit that this made me laugh the first time that I saw it. But when I pulled back and started thinking about why these kids were crying, I felt a little bit heartbroken and I got excited about self-regulation. And here's why. There are a bunch of stories that we all know baked into this idea that this child is crying for a ridiculous reason. Her reaction is an overreaction through that self-control lens. And the stress of children is often viewed as not really real or legitimate. So that's why this is funny, because through a self-control lens, this reaction is inappropriate or over the top. She asked for something, it was given to her, and she cries. How silly is that, right? But a self-regulation lens is going to see this moment in a different way. And that different way isn't about making us parents feel guilty. It's about finding out how we could have stopped the situation from happening and or what we could do when somebody flips their lid. The focus in this picture and in this perspective of self-control is on behavior, surface behavior. We're thinking she's crying, she's upset. We're not thinking about why now. Why is she crying now? What has led up to this situation? Have we had situations like this previously? Why is this happening now? That essential curiosity is a cornerstone of self-regulation. The focus is on the child. Our own stress is not even part of this picture. You'll notice that there are no parents in any of these three pictures. The parent or caregiver does not have a role in this moment. It's totally on that child. That behavior is on that child. It's their fault. That's a self-control model. In a self-regulation model, there's connection and disconnection. How connected or disconnected is this child to the other person in her life who's taking the picture? There is this story baked in here as well of misbehavior or poor parenting. All of us have been at that grocery store seeing a child losing it or a parent losing it with a child and, either being the person or seeing other people giving that person, that side look like, oh, get your kid under control, or, oh, that parent doesn't know what they're doing. And these comments are about self-control, right? That child lacks self-control or that parent lacks self-control. It isn't about being curious and wondering why now. It's a focus on that surface behavior and it appears illegitimate. So all of this has that story of self-control surrounding these ideas. So when we think about controlling yourself and being asked to control yourself, and the idea of shifting this call to self-regulation first, this does not mean that people who are stressed can do whatever they want to make themselves feel better. And I think that's a common misunderstanding about self-regulation. And I want to be really clear that when a toddler is upset, for example, they can't just throw sand in someone's face and we shrug it off and say, oh, that's stress behavior. They're stressed out, and move on and accept that behavior happened. There's definitely more to it than that. And we're going to get into how to manage misbehavior with a self-regulation lens. Being well-regulated is different than having self-control. Being well-regulated is about knowing where your stress levels are and having them at a manageable level so that we can function using the parts of our brain that help us to think clearly and problem solve and make decisions and play and create and so on. And those parts of our brain are also integral for us to have self-control. So if we are using those parts of our brain and our brain is well regulated, then we can have self-control. Regulating kids is different from managing their behavior. And this is a really important part of this talk. The latter can undermine the former. If my goal is compliance and not connection, and I am focused on managing the behavior of the child, and I think, oh, well, they're exhibiting stress behavior and I don't like that stress behavior. That stress behavior is unappealing to me. And I try to control that behavior without considering the underlying stress and without dealing with the underlying stress. I am focused on the compliance of the child and not on those child's needs and skill deficits and disconnection. And I also want to point out that self-regulation means reframing the way we see early learning in kids. Stuart Shanker, who is the Canadian guru of self-regulation, you can find his work at self-reg.ca and many other places. He writes for Psychology Today. He has books out. I'm using a lot of resources from him in this talk. He says to see a child differently, we need to see a different child. And I really think that when we look at children through that reframing that self-regulation offers us, we can see what's happening in their brains. We can see them as capable. We can see them as good people who are having a really tough moment. And that changes the way that we interact with them and the way we think about ourselves. And I think that all of this can be articulated quite well through this won't versus can't model. So this infographic is from Kristen Wines. Don't believe she's a doctor yet. She might be doing her PhD. She is local to the area that I'm in, which is Vancouver Island. And she has a great website with lots of wonderful resources. I can't recommend her resources enough. This particular resource I got from the self-reg.ca website and their list of infographics. And when I look at it, I can see the won't side being a self-control side of things, a self-control lens, and the can't yet side being more of that growth mindset and self-regulation side of things. And so when I think about the little girl with the sandwiches that is crying, I think, she won't behave. That won't side of things is going to be judgmental. It's going to see her as, an overreacting, oversensitive person who, just changes her mind too frequently. She's flippant. She's, ornery about things. All of these judgmental terms are I'm looking at her surface behavior and I'm assuming a lot about what she's capable of or incapable of. And then I might want to pull her out of that crying tantrum with rewards and punishments. I might say, hey, if you stop crying about the sandwich, then we'll get to go to the park later. Or, okay, if you don't want this sandwich, I'm just going to take it away. Well, then stop crying. Show me that you want the sandwich. And these are our efforts, I think, from the heart. We are trying as parents to teach our children to be good and to have self-control, but this practice is misinterpreted. What we're actually doing is leading us to disconnection, and in the end, we are filled with frustration, guilt, and shame, and so is the child. Another option, and there are probably many options, but the option I'm talking about today is self-regulation. So when we shift over to this can't yet side of the infographic and we think of the little girl who's crying, we might pull back and get curious. Why now? Why is she crying now? Is it because lunch is an hour later than usual and she's hangry? She's so hungry she's angry? Maybe she's crying out of relief that she finally got her sandwich. Maybe she misinterpreted what triangles meant because she's quite young still and she thought she meant squares. She wanted her sandwich cut into squares. Perhaps she didn't want her sandwich cut at all, but she misunderstood your question and communicated in the wrong way. And she feels terrible that she didn't get what she wanted and she messed up. So we pull back and we get curious and we think about those stressors that might have built up and led us to this moment, we might also wonder, okay, how can I help? What can I do to stop this from happening next time? Can I make sure that we have a snack while we're waiting for lunch if it's late, so that we are staying well regulated enough that we can communicate what our needs are, and so that we don't find ourselves going overboard. And in the end, when we use a self-regulation approach, and I'll offer some other ideas about how we can do that in just a moment, we find ourselves feeling strengthened in our relationship with our children, and we find our children feel supported, and this builds our relationship and our connection, which is the ultimate goal for most of us, probably all of us. So self-regulation does have some meta language or shared language, and this is not just stuff that I've made up. This is stuff that you can find in many books, and I will put some books in the comments for you. But one thing I wanted to go through briefly, and there's a video, a link below, is Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. And so I'm using this picture here of the triune brain, which was noted by McLaren, to just simplify what's going on in the brain for self-regulation. It's not essential for us to know all of that technical language, and I also like to make this less technical so that we can communicate it with the kids in our lives and not feel so intimidated by the whole thing. And so I'm going to put on my puppet. It's my hand puppet for my hand model of the brain. You don't need a puppet. You can just use your hand. But if you want to make a puppet, I just went to the dollar store and got a couple mittens, stuck a red mitten inside a blue mitten, and cut the thumb off. And then that way I can make my hand puppet showing the brain. I've got some brown felt around the bottom for my reptilian part of the brain. And then here's my neocortex, or my blue thinking brain. And then inside I can flip my lid and have my red part of my brain, or my limbic system, also the amygdala. And I use this to communicate with others who are practicing self-regulation, how I'm feeling, and to help understand how they might be feeling, and to tell the story of what's going on in our brains. So I encourage you to take a look at that video by Dr. Dan Siegel, but the basic premise is this. Our neocortex, which is this newest part of our brain, is where a lot of things are going on that we need in order to have self-control. We need to be able to problem solve and to think clearly and communicate, to be able to listen, to be able to get creative, to play, to learn. All of those things are happening in this thinking part of our brain. And then at the same time, all of these parts of the brain are working together. Our limbic system is working hard, looking for threats, and communicating with the other parts of our brain. And then we have the reptilian part of our brain, which is that oldest part of our brain. The brain stems in there, for example, that might be a term you're familiar with, that's helping to monitor our heart rate, and give us energy, our body temperature, our breathing, all that sort of stuff. And so we go about our day, and if we encounter stress, our threat brain, or our limbic system, might even take over. So that story that I told you earlier about, going about my day, being concerned about work, stressed about work, being late for something, which I don't like being late, the room being messy, all of these stresses were compiling. And then I hit my shin on that coffee table and I flipped my lid. So my neocortex, my thinking brain, goes essentially offline, and my threat brain takes over. In the same way as I would react if I saw a real threat, like a grizzly bear barreling down towards me. My threat brain takes over and tells my body to have a fight, flight, freeze, or faint reaction, and to get myself to safety. And that can look many different ways. In my case, it was more of a fight reaction where I felt my whole body flush. and I felt this rush of heat, and I ended up fighting with my children about music in the car. And it took a while for me to get my lid back down. But once my lid's back down, I can apologize, I can work through the problem with them. But while my lid is flipped, I can't really do much other than have those fight, flight, freeze, or faint reactions. Is it appropriate to have fight, flight, or freeze reactions that are um, harmful to others or myself? No, no, it is not. And there are ways that we can get our lid back down more quickly, and use our resiliency strategies to even stop ourselves from getting to that point of flipping our lid. So this is the part where I want to remind everyone that we all have our inventory, and that when we are aware of our inventory, we can have more control over what's going on with our stress. We can manage our stress, and we can find resiliency strategies and self-compassion and the tools that we need in order to be more successful. And it's really important to acknowledge that stressors have a multiplying effect on each other. If I am tired and hungry and my jacket is too small and I have an itchy tag on the back of my neck and it's too hot in this jacket, and then I get to my preschool and the toy that I was most excited about using isn't there and I can't find it. And then on my way to tell my teacher that, I trip and fall in the mud. It gets really hard for me to communicate to the teacher what I need. And so I might react with some stress behavior. Maybe I just start crying or shouting, or maybe I do something less obviously stress-based. And we'll get to that as well in a few minutes. So there are many ways to do inventory and to assess all of the stressors that are piling up. One way to look at these stressors is through the model of self, others, and the world. So am I connected with myself? What kinds of things are causing me to feel connected or disconnected? That's a way to look at the stress in my own self. And then I might turn that lens to others, my relationships with others, or the space I need from others. And then there's the world. So as I said before, the human-made environment, or the natural environment, or even the world of ideas, how those things might be affecting me. Another popular way to look at our stress inventory is the idea of mind, body, and heart. So how is my heart feeling? And how is my mind feeling? Am I feeling like I am getting enough interaction with my mind? Am I trying enough new ideas? And then your body, physically, how are you feeling? There's also this great model called the Shanker model. Again, this is from Stuart Shanker, self-reg.ca. And I don't think that most kids I know use this model in a really obvious way. And I don't think that I really use this model, in a really thoughtful way at this point, unless I'm feeling really stressed and I need to pull back and go through my domains. But I do like this model as a starting point for someone who's interested in self-regulation, because practicing with this does help me to understand where I'm at. And if I'm having a really challenging moment with a child, or if I'm noticing a child's stress behavior, it's helpful to pull back and think about these different domains, because if I don't, I might miss something. And I find that missing thing is usually the thing that I really need to focus in on. So the biological domain is just like it sounds. It's, what's going on in your body physically. Are you feeling well? Are you feeling sick? Do you have something sore in your body, like a tension around your neck? Do you have an itchy tag? Are you hungry? Did you eat healthy food today, or just handfuls of cookies? Have you drank enough water? How is the temperature of the room? The lighting that's coming in to your eyes might be affecting your biological domain. The emotional domain is, again, just as it sounds, your feelings. Do you have a lot of them? Are they really strong feelings? There aren't good feelings and bad feelings, there's just feelings. And some feelings are more manageable than others. If I have really strong feelings of excitement because Christmas is on its way and I love Christmas and I'm anticipating gifts and there's lots of things to do, that strong emotion of excitement may cause me stress. It may use up enough of my energy that it impacts my stress load. Then there's your cognitive domain. So again, this is necessarily positive or negative. I might be not, getting enough stimulus, and so I'm kind of bored. I'm not learning enough, and that can cause me stress because I'm not fulfilled cognitively. Or I've been trying a lot of new things, and I'm now trying to work on long division, and it's really challenging, and I don't seem to be getting it, and it's really important to me that I get it, and that can cause some cognitive stress. Your social domain is, again, just how it sounds. But there's, again, no positive or negative type of social need. We all have needs to be social with others, but we also have needs to be alone sometimes and to get time on our own and by ourselves. We might have some positive social experiences, but sometimes there's so much positive that it adds stress. Going to a party and really having a good time at that party and seeing all of those people, at the end of the day, we can feel really tired from that. And at the same time, there could be the apprehension of meeting new people, or seeing somebody that you're not entirely comfortable with, those kinds of things. And your pro-social domain is one that I think folks have trouble remembering what it is, but it's tied to your morality, your values, your ethics. So if there's something going on in your life that is causing you stress when it comes to your values or your ethics, that would fall into this domain. So, being concerned about your neighbor because her dog just died, that can have a really strong effect on some of us. Or worrying about a more global issue like climate change, and that could impact our stress load. So I'm going to take you through a stress inventory. And again, you may want to take out a writing utensil and some paper and draw or journal about your stress inventory. You can also pause the video and go through it on your own. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to reflect on is your biological domain. So how are you feeling in your body right now? And what kinds of things have you done today or even last night to meet your physical needs? Have you eaten well? Did you get a good sleep? Are you feeling a cold coming on? Did you have too much coffee? How's the temperature? The lighting? Have you been getting out in nature enough? Your emotional domain. Your feelings. Which feelings are sticking out to you? Are there feelings you're not even sure you can name somewhere in your body? Where are these feelings located in your body? Your social domain. Have you connected with friends lately? Do you feel disconnected from someone in your life? Is there an event coming up? Did you miss an event lately? Have you had enough alone time? Your cognitive domain. Are you stressed because you're learning about self-regulation? And it feels overwhelming? Are you getting enough cognitive stimulus in your job? Are you done teaching your kids how to do long division? And your pro-social domain. So thinking about your morals or your ethics. Have you had to make a really challenging decision lately that pulls on your heartstrings? Have you heard some news that upsets you? Something about the world changing that you have strong feelings about? So we all have different inventories when it comes to our stress. We have different stress loads, and different experiences in stress are going to yield different results for each person. I might not be that perturbed by bright lights, where somebody who suffers from migraines might be more nervous around bright lights because they know what it can lead to. There's a different type of stress from the same stimulus. There's also different ways of dealing with resiliency. One type of resiliency strategy is going to have a different effect on different people. So I want to do a brief experiment with you. And that is for you to root yourself in your seat and roll your shoulders back a couple times and place one of your hands on your chest and one of your hands on your stomach. And gently close your eyes. And with that one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach, take a couple deep breaths and notice. And now I invite you to switch hands. So the hand that was on your chest, move to your stomach, and the hand that was on your stomach, move to your chest. And close your eyes. Take a couple deep breaths and notice. And what I want you to reflect on now is whether it felt better to have one of your hands on your chest the first time, for example, or was it more comfortable the second time around when you'd moved your hands? Was it the same either way, or was there something different? Just reflect on that for a moment. Maybe just try it again briefly if you need to check. So when I do this experiment with meeting of people or in person or even virtually, I find that most people do feel a difference, and there's a small group of people who do not feel any difference at all. And it isn't that more people enjoy their left hand on their heart or their right hand on their heart. It's kind of 50-50. But the point is that if I said, okay, it seems like you need to calm down, I'm going to help you to regulate. I want you to put your left hand on your chest and your right hand on your stomach. And if you're one of those people that felt way better having their right hand on their chest and their left hand on their stomach, then this direction, this specific approach to a resiliency strategy is going to help you less than it would if I didn't give you a strict direction on how to calm down. So making sure that when we're guiding people in resiliency, that they're part of the plan, but also looking at lists of self-care or ways in which we can be resilient, we need to think, okay, maybe some of these things aren't going to help me. For example, tidying might not be your cup of tea when it comes to a resiliency strategy. Instead, reading with a cup of tea might be something that you need to do for your resiliency strategy. So these are all some different ideas here, and self-care is a really popular topic right now. But it's definitely takes practice to figure out what will help you in the long term to feel more comfortable and to lower your stress load, and what is going to help you in the moment when your stress load you've noticed is getting too high. Finally, I want to talk briefly about how to be stress detectives. And this is a great time to think about the blue brain versus the red brain. So when we go back to this puppet of mine, the blue brain being your neocortex, your thinking brain, and the red brain being your limbic system or your threat brain. So what kinds of things can we do when we're in our blue brain or our thinking brain? And I've mentioned this before. We can do things like play. We can do things like remember a memory that was really special to us. We can try something new. We can take a risk. We can meet new people. We can plan out our day. We can organize our calendar. We can clean up. All these things take our thinking brain to do. Our red brain, on the other hand, makes it difficult to do a lot of those things. We are in survival mode. We're thinking about how we can protect ourselves from a perceived threat. And so that changes the abilities that we have when our blue brain is offline. We can't, for example, socially engage when we are in our red brain. And this is really hard to process sometimes, because when we feel like we're about to flip our lid, we actually feel less like socially engaging. So how do we call on ourselves or notice when someone's getting more threatened and feeling closer to flipping their lid? How do we call on them to socially engage to help them find the resilience strategy they need before they jump to a fight or flight reaction or a freeze or shutdown reaction? And I think oftentimes we keep acting like everyone's in their blue brain, and we try to talk them out of that fight or flight reaction. We try to socially engage with somebody in their blue brain. But when we get into a big emotion and we have flipped our lid and we're just feeling that, and we're going through that fight or flight or freeze or shutdown sort of experience, it's like going through a train tunnel. And once a child, for example, who's flipped their lid is going through that train tunnel, we can't break through that train tunnel and pull them out. They're going through and we need to wait for them to get to the other side. So communicating to someone in red brain as though they're in blue brain and trying to reason with them or offer them a way out isn't necessarily going to help. So in our self-regulation approach, we want to be stress detectives. We want to stop ourselves and others from even getting to that lid flipping point if we can. A lid flip's not a bad thing. We do it sometimes, and it can feel really good afterwards when we've got all of that tension and frustration out. But if we can avoid it, then I think we want to. So being a stress detective is asking that question: what does dysregulation feel like, look like, sound like? And when we can notice that a child is getting dysregulated, we can help to bring them back to blue. We can help to lower their threat load. And this comes for us as well. So what kinds of things might we see young children or the children in our lives do? And every child's different, right? I mentioned my two children earlier. My 10-year-old, when he's getting dysregulated, he starts kind of pacing a little bit. He forgets what he was doing. Usually he has so much direction. When he's well-regulated, what does well-regulated feel like? He has so much direction in what he's trying to do. When he's dysregulated, he keeps saying, well, I just don't even know what to do. Or I'm bored. Those kinds of things will be indications to me that he is dysregulated. He starts kind of hanging around me and trying to get me to help him with things that he doesn't really need help with. He's looking for connection. He's dysregulated and he's trying to regulate, but isn't sure exactly what to do. These are indications that he needs me to help him to regulate, or that he needs to regulate himself. Where my younger child has a very different way of showing that they're dysregulated. They will start breaking things, knocking someone else's tower over, breaking someone else's Lego. They'll start complaining, I don't like that food. I don't want that dinner. They'll start even sometimes making up stories about sad things that happened, like so and so at school didn't let me join their game. And that event may have happened, but usually it hadn't happened in that way, and they exaggerate the pain that happened, looking for me to connect with them, looking for me to empathize with them, looking for me to jump in and try to ask them what's going on and how are they feeling. When they're well regulated, they're funny and playful, and they tell hilarious stories that, again, may have not happened, but they're funny and friendly stories. So everybody's got a different way of expressing that they're regulated or dysregulated. And noticing what our cues are and noticing the cues of the people in our life can really help us understand what stress feels like. So, what does stress feel like for that person? What does stress feel like for you? Where do you feel it in your body? What does it look like? What does it sound like when it's coming out of your mouth? So, we aren't always going to get there in time for ourselves or for others and stop them from flipping their lid, stop them from being emotionally flooded and losing it. That's going to happen sometimes. So we can't always be calm and settled. Sometimes the emotions are rising and we don't get there in time. What do we do when somebody is emotionally flooded? What do we do when someone has flipped their lid? So there's some really great research coming out about the interbrain, and this is a type of co-regulation. So I can't necessarily regulate you, but I can co-regulate. I can show you what calm feels like, and I can also use my interbrain to connect with you. So the interbrain is like a Bluetooth connection between my brain and your brain. And it doesn't really work over a screen. But when I'm in a room, for example, if I walk into a room and the people in the room have just had an argument, I can feel that tension. I wasn't there for it, but I know that something happened. Or I can walk in a room after a really funny joke was told, and even though the laughter has subsided, I walk in and I can feel this cheeriness and lightness in the room, and I want to be a part of that. I'm drawn in. My interbrain has picked up on something in the room. So we can use that Bluetooth connection to support others in co-regulation. We can also not support them and spread our dysregulation. So if I'm really frustrated and dysregulated and I'm dealing with somebody else who's starting to get some emotional upheaval or stress, my dysregulation is contagious, their dysregulation is contagious. We are going to both end up potentially flipping our lids. But my external regulation can also help them. So if my needs are met and I've taken care of my stress and I've used my resiliency strategies, my skills are there, then I can use that to externally regulate the other people in my life. So sometimes external regulation might just look like sitting in the same room as somebody who's struggling and taking some deep breaths and looking at them calmly and just waiting. If somebody's flipped their lid, I'm not going to talk them down out of that. I can't talk somebody out of a train tunnel, but I can sit with them. Maybe rub their back, maybe offer a hug. And we'll talk about what else we can do in just a moment. It's how we learn what well-regulated feels like. So being co-regulated and our interbrain is a learning strategy that humans are equipped with, and probably other species too. When I rock a baby, I'm showing the baby what calm feels like. And there are people who don't have very much experience with calm, who have gone through a lot of trauma. What does calm feel like? And, what does being well-regulated feel like? When someone is in their blue brain and they're feeling really calm, talking about that calmness, talking about how calm feels is another skill in interbrain and co-regulation. We don't need to just bring this out when shit hits the fan. And I know that laced into this is that story we all know of permissiveness. That story where I'm in the grocery store and I don't think that parent is correcting that poor behavior of the child. So therefore, that's some poor parenting that I'm seeing. They're being permissive. They're just letting things slide. And I know that I experienced this when I discovered interbrain and co-regulation. My oldest child, when he was younger, would have pretty large tantrums. And this moment where he flipped his lid, typically for a lot of people, actually, when you go into a limbic reaction, this lasts about 30 minutes. You need to outrun that predator, right? So my son would flip his lid and I wouldn't correct his behavior no matter what had just happened because there was no point. His lid was flipped. Instead, I would wait until he was through that tunnel. I would rub his back, I would hold him and rock him. And when he was done, when he was back to blue, he would say, "Oh, I'm all right now." And that was the moment where I would step in and say, "I'm glad you're all right. I need to talk about what happened though. You hit your sibling. It is not okay to hit your sibling." We would talk about and go through the misbehavior that occurred after the stress behavior had subsided and he was back to blue and could hear me and communicate and problem solve. And that was really key to also our connection. He knew I was there for him when he was really upset and down and out. When we're in that moment, that's what we need. So I was really focused on the connection side of things. From an external point of view, I'm sure there were other adults in the vicinity who would be watching me rubbing the back of the child who just hit someone else, thinking she's permissive, she's not a good parent. And I really needed to block that story out and know that I was focused on connection-based parenting. Compliance wasn't the main goal at that moment, and it really isn't the main goal for me in general. So I know that story is going to crop up for some of you, and I encourage you to rethink it and to resist it. And as I said, there's this message of connection that comes out with interbrain and co-regulation. I can lend my calm to another person. I can accept where they're at right now when their lid is flipped with a non-judgmental gaze and instead with this gauge of compassion. And that is a self-regulation approach. And of course, dialogue is really important, and talking about each other's needs and talking about our feelings is great. All I'm saying that is that in a self-regulation approach, talking about those things when we've got our blue brain happening, great, let's do that. Talking about things that are going to cause us to flip our lid, maybe not so much. And when our lid is flipped, is that a good time to have that dialogue and talk about our feelings and needs? No. We stutter, we can barely hear each other. It's really like talking into an abyss. So there isn't much of a point of it. Waiting until our lid is down is pretty key. So there's some wonderful tools out there. A lot of folks selling things to help us in our self-regulation journeys. And I will spend another video describing some of those tools, some great books and other resources for different age groups and for us adults. I'm not going to do that in this video, but I know that a lot of us are thinking, just tell me what to do. And we like to have answers. We like to have directions. We like to have books. But like I said at the beginning of this talk, self-regulation is really a mindset shift from self-control to self-reg. And self-regulation, there are some things that I could really suggest that you do. The first is to discuss and plan in Blue Brain. So again, my child who is now 10 years old, when he was younger and he flipped his lid, he would often hit a sibling or hit me. And we would talk in Blue Brain about how he felt about that. He felt guilty. He felt terrible about it. He did not like losing his controls, as he would say. And I didn't want him to feel shame about that. I wanted to help plan so that we didn't have that problem in the future. And so we communicated when he felt like he was going to flip his lid, and he would go and do some resiliency strategies. But also, we agreed that when his lid was flipped, I would scoop him up and place him gently on the couch or gently in his bed or gently in the car, and that I would be near him but not right beside him while he was flipping his lid. And he wanted me to keep his siblings safe. He wanted me to keep me safe because he didn't feel like he could get his controls. Now he's 10 years old and he wouldn't hurt a fly. He learned through connection how to manage that stress and choose resiliency rather than reaction. Kids need to have a role in that. They are capable, and it is our job as adults to help guide them, absolutely. But they can have a role when they're in Blue Brain. And those plans change. Kids grow and change. We grow and change. Our needs change. It's a process. So now when my child, who's now 10, flips his lid, he knows that he wants to go to his room and put on his headphones and listen to his music, and he doesn't want anyone to bother him. And that is what he needs at that time. And finally, I just want to reiterate one more time that strategies, resiliency strategies, and stress detection strategies should not be for the purpose of getting kids to behave. This is about connection over compliance. Of course, we don't want children throwing sand in other people's eyes, hitting other people, shouting, etc. But to have the compassion and the ability to see children through a self-reg lens means to recognize their stress behavior, their humanity, and to connect with them on how you can help them and that you will always love them. This is unconditional love in practice, and that's what we as parents, guardians, etc. want. Thanks so much for joining me and for listening. Again, my name is Lyndze Harvey, and I am the founder of Teach to Resist, and I will keep posting videos and other resources for you on your journey towards a more praxis-based and resistant way of teaching and learning and parenting and humaning. Thanks so much.